It's really sad seeing how far PlayStation has fallen over the past decade or so. It all started with the PlayStation 4. That was such an underwhelming generation of PlayStation. Not that many great games. There were a few, of course. There was God of War, there was Spider-Man, Uncharted 4, Horizon, and yeah, that's pretty much it. And most of the games that I mentioned there pretty much play almost exactly the same as one another. They're all third-person action games with melee combat and stealth elements, and that's it's a pretty basic formulaic approach that Sony made with the PS4 as opposed to the PS3 that had a wide diversity of different genres. You had first-person shooters, third-person shooters, action games, racing games, fighting games, platformers. There was just a much more interesting lineup of games for the PlayStation 3 and previous PlayStation generations, and the PS4 was a noticeable decline in quality, and it just wasn't as interesting to be a PlayStation gamer at that point than the 20 years before. What's funny about that is I remember being so underwhelmed during the first few years of the PS4's life cycle, thinking there's no way it can get any worse than this. This is just such a dry lineup of games. They just don't have a lot going for it for the PlayStation 4, and I can't imagine the PS5 will be any worse than this. That's actually what I was thinking at that time in 2015, 2016, during the same point of the PS4's life cycle as we are currently in the PS5's life cycle. Well, I was completely wrong about that, because the PS5 is even drier than the PS4 as far as having a good lineup of first-party games. Like, seriously, name a killer app on the PlayStation 5 that you cannot play anywhere else. And let's not even talk about the fact that they're releasing games on PC. We'll actually talk about that in a bit. But just looking at the first-party PlayStation games that have been released over the past few years since the release of the PS5, what are the big ones? Well, you have God of War Ragnarok, Horizon 2, Spider-Man 2, Demon's Soul Remake, Sackboy, Ratchet and Clank. Okay, well, half of those games were released also on PlayStation 4. So the whole point of getting a new console was pretty much negated by that fact that they were still releasing games on PS4 up until recently. And that's why it's so absurd that they're going ahead and making a PS5 Pro when we haven't even started to utilize the power of the regular PS5 because there haven't been any fucking games for it. And yeah, the other games I mentioned that were not released on PlayStation 4, like Spider-Man, Ratchet and Clank, they got put on PC. And the ones that haven't been put on there yet, like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Spider-Man 2, you know they are going to come on PC eventually. So there's no such thing as a true PlayStation exclusive anymore. It does not exist. Oh, but exclusives don't make money anymore. They shouldn't do exclusives. They should put all their games on all platforms. Well, as far as exclusives not making money anymore, have a conversation with Nintendo about that. I think they would tell a completely different story. Yeah, as far as having games that you release on one console, but don't release on the other consoles, but also release on PC, it sounds great in theory, but in practice, it just ends up diluting the brand and hurting the quality of the games that used to be first party. Look at Sega. Look at Sega. Can you say, honestly, with a straight face, that Sega has gotten better? Their games have gotten better since they exited the console market and went third party? No. You can't, because that would be a lie. I mean, their flagship series, the Sonic the Hedgehog series, went from one of the most notable and important series in the history of the video game industry to becoming a laughingstock for the past 20 years or so. Xbox is another example. As soon as they started going multi-platform around 2014, 2015, it's only gone downhill since then as far as the quality of their first-party lineup of games. And yes, despite what those mouth-breathing console fanboys would have you believe, when a game is released on two different platforms, it's multi-platform and is no longer exclusive. And with PlayStation, despite their weak lineup of games during the last generation, they were still doing very well and were kicking ass and breaking records because they didn't really have any competition in the console market. Xbox was putting their games out on other platforms. PlayStation still had exclusive games, up until a few years ago, that was, at least. And during more than half of the PS4's life cycle, the only competition they faced from Nintendo was the goddamn Wii U. So they just kind of won by default. And they still are with the PS5. It is still the fastest selling console right now, and it will defeat the Xbox Series X handily, and it won't even be a close competition. So it's funny when all these reports come out and people have their own spin on what's going on with PlayStation and why they are struggling a little bit financially. Their profit margins aren't what they used to be. They're not making money off of their games anymore, apparently, and their game sales overall just have much lower profit margins than they did 5 years ago. I'm like, why is that? Well, about 5 years ago, that's when you guys decided to start putting your games on other platforms and decided to pretty much have no reason to invest in the PlayStation platform and actually buy games on the PlayStation Store. Here's a common misconception that people have about how the console industry works and how it's always worked throughout history. They have never made most of their money off of first-party game sales. They haven't. It's always been third-party games that have been sold on their platform. Think of the Call of Duties. Think of the Assassin's Creeds. All those big blockbuster AAA games that are multi-platform. That's where they have made most of their money. And the exclusives, while yes, they want to make money off those game sales, the primary purpose of having the exclusive content in the first place was mostly to give you a reason to buy that system over the other ones on the market, and ultimately to buy all your games on that platform, so that the install base is the highest it could possibly be, because they have all these exclusive games you can't play anywhere else. But most of their money has always been from third-party games. That's how it's been since the beginning, and that's how it is today. They've never made more than a fraction of their revenue off of first-party game sales. It's always been third-party when we're talking about consoles. Here's the problem. When you put your games on other platforms, you give people less of a reason to want to be a part of the PlayStation ecosystem. The difference between someone who wanted to play a PlayStation game now versus 10 years ago is that 10 years ago, you had to buy a PlayStation console in order to play those games. Now, you can freely play them on PC. You're not going to get a PlayStation 5 if you can get them all on PC, and usually they run better, they look better. You can install mods on a lot of these games like Spider-Man and God of War, so it's a no-brainer. You're going to get the PC version and not the PS5 version if you have a PC. So if you're just able to play all the games on PC and don't have a PlayStation, you're not buying games on the PlayStation Store anymore, are you? No, you're not buying your Call of Duties or your Assassin's Creeds or your Battlefields or whatever on the PlayStation, because Sony is making their console obsolete and giving you no reason to actually own one, because the only reason to ever own a console over a PC or own it alongside a PC would be for the exclusive games that you couldn't play anywhere else. You don't have that anymore. It was just a really bad business move that Sony decided to double down on, and they continue to double down on, and they have it in their heads that this is what they need for the PlayStation brand to survive, is to branch out to other systems and other platforms. Meanwhile, you have Nintendo with the Nintendo Switch, who does not put any of their games on any other platforms, yet somehow they don't have any of these problems that Sony is having right now, as far as profit margins, as far as making money. Like, Nintendo is breaking records with the Nintendo Switch, and probably will continue to build that momentum with the Switch 2 in 2025, assuming they have learned their mistakes with the Wii U. Hopefully they did. But yeah, the whole idea that there is no overlap between console and PC is just, it couldn't be further from the truth. I am someone who is a good example of this. I played so many PlayStation games because of the exclusives. That's what drew me in, and that's why I had a PlayStation, Xbox, and a PC. I always had every system, but now that the games are just coming out on PC anyway, I don't spend money on the Xbox store anymore. I don't spend money on the PlayStation store anymore, because I just buy everything on Steam now, because that's where all the games are. I've given a lot less money to Sony over the past 5 or so years. I've probably spent less than $100 on PlayStation games on PC or PS4, while I've spent hundreds of dollars on PlayStation every year when I was younger. So it's just insane to me that people think that this is still such a great business model, such a sustainable business model that's going to work out so great for Sony and PlayStation. Well, if it was, then they would be making more money, not less, right? Their profit margins would be bigger and not smaller, right? There's so many people that have abandoned PlayStation and have just not seen a reason to invest in the platform, mostly because of the lack of exclusive games and the lack of, well, good quality games to begin with. Those are two big problems that Sony has. The games aren't that great, aren't that memorable, there aren't enough of them, and the games that they do bring out, they just go on other systems anyway. So What's the fucking point? Exclusive content matters. It always has and it always will. When you don't have it, this is what happens.